On Christmas Eve, my only son told me the best gift I could give them was my absence. I did not argue. I quietly paid off the house, secretly sold it, and boarded a one-way flight to Florida. Michigan was 18 degrees that night. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the atmosphere inside my son's living room. A massive Christmas tree shimmered with expensive gold ornaments. Beneath it sat luxury gifts wrapped in silk ribbons. I sat quietly in a leather armchair. My rough mechanic's hands curled around a cup of cold ginger tea, searching for warmth that was no longer there. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, a few snacks, get comfortable, and remember this: everyone in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They simply chose wrong. Subscribe and leave comment number 1 if you want to hear this story all the way to the end. Across from me sat Ethan, my only son, and his wife Sarah. Ethan wore an expensive cashmere sweater while casually swirling a glass of red wine. He never looked at me. His eyes stayed glued to his iPad as his fingers moved across the screen. I cleared my throat, trying to break the silence crushing my chest. I told him I heard his tech company had been struggling with cash flow. I said I still had some savings. Around $25,000. If he needed it, I would gladly give it to him. Ethan cut me off before I could finish. He never even looked up. He said my $25,000 meant nothing in his industry. It would barely cover 2 employees for a week. He told me to keep it for myself. The words hit harder than the winter air outside. My hand trembled slightly. Tea spilled onto the saucer. Then Sarah smirked. It was small, almost invisible. But I saw it. She turned to Ethan with a syrupy voice coated in poison. She said, "If Dad wants to help, you should accept it." Then she looked directly at me. She explained that this Christmas they were taking the children skiing in Aspen with Ethan's business partners. Space would be limited. Everyone there would be wealthy people from the upper business world. That was when Ethan finally looked up, but not at me. He stared at the wall behind my shoulder and slammed his wine glass onto the table with a sharp crack. In a flat, emotionless voice, he told me I was old. My world was bolts and engine grease. His world was algorithms and million-dollar deals. He said my presence at his parties only embarrassed him. I stared at my son. The little boy who once cried and begged me to hold him during thunderstorms now stood before me as a polished stranger. Tall, successful, cold. I did not fight back. I chose silence instead. I stood up, put on my worn-out coat, and quietly walked toward the door. Nobody followed me. Nobody said goodbye. When the heavy wooden door closed behind me, I stood alone beneath the falling snow. That was the moment I made my decision. They wanted my absence. Fine. They were about to get it in a way they never expected. I drove my 2012 Ford F-150 through the snow-covered roads toward home. The windshield wipers squeaked steadily through the dark night. My mind drifted through 40 years of memories. When my wife died from illness, Ethan was only 7 years old. I stood before her photograph and made a promise. I swore I would give our son the best life possible. I was just a grease-stained mechanic with smoke-soaked hands. But my son would walk into school wearing clean, white shirts. To pay for Ethan's private school education, I worked 2 jobs every single day. In the mornings, I worked at the repair shop. At night, I hauled freight at a shipping warehouse. I slept less than 4 hours a day. My hands were covered with scars from engine burns and sliced metal. My joints ached whenever the weather changed. Every sacrifice was for Ethan. When he graduated from college, these rough hands signed an $80,000 check to pay off the rest of his student loans. And when he married Sarah and wanted that beautiful 4-bedroom house in an upscale Michigan neighborhood, I never hesitated. I emptied my retirement fund and handed them $200,000 for the down payment. In total, I poured more than $800,000 into my son's life. I never asked for a single dollar in return. I only wanted a home, a place where I belonged when I grew old. But money and success in the tech industry changed Ethan. It changed him faster than a Michigan winter storm rolling in overnight. Last year, during their housewarming party, Ethan introduced me to his friends. He smiled and said, "This is Uncle Jack, an old family friend visiting from down south." Uncle Jack. I stood frozen in the middle of their luxurious living room, still holding the homemade cake I had baked myself. Sarah stared at my Walmart clothes with open disgust. She looked at me as if I had carried disease into her house. The more successful they became, the more ashamed they were of me. To them, I represented everything outdated and embarrassing. A burden. A stain on the perfect upper-class family image they worked so hard to create. But they forgot one thing. The foundation of that perfect life had been built with the sweat and blood of this mechanic. My truck finally pulled into my driveway. The house was silent, empty, cold. I turned on the lights and stopped in front of the hallway mirror. My hair had turned completely white. Deep wrinkles cut across my face. I stared at my reflection and asked myself one simple question. Jack, did you really sacrifice your entire life just to earn a smirk from your daughter-in-law and rejection from your only son? No. It was time to end this suffering. If you believe parents deserve respect after a lifetime of sacrifice, hit the like button right now to support family justice stories like this one. Because that very night I opened an old steel safe hidden in the back of my closet. Inside was a dusty brown folder I had not touched in years. Ethan and Sarah had forgotten one very important detail about the house they were living in. They had no idea there was a small secret buried inside those property documents. A secret that would destroy their entire world within the next 30 days. I sat alone in the silent room, turning page after page of the old brown documents. With every sheet I touched, more painful memories came flooding back. Their disrespect had not happened overnight. It was years of humiliation. Years of being pushed out of my own son's life, piece by piece. I remembered my grandson's 8th birthday party. I had saved part of my pension for 3 straight months just to buy him a large building block set. I was excited to bring it to their house. But the moment I stepped through the door, Sarah stopped me. She looked at the toy box, then looked at me with disgust. She said cheap plastic toys were harmful to children's development. She proudly explained that her son only played with imported organic wooden toys from Europe. My grandson saw me standing there. But he looked away. He was too busy playing with his brand new tablet. Ethan stood right beside them. He did not defend me, not even once. He simply rolled his eyes in annoyance. The toy box I bought with my hard-earned savings ended up abandoned beside the trash can near the front entrance. Another memory slammed into me. One night I suddenly came down with a terrible fever. My entire body shook uncontrollably. I was too weak to drive myself to the hospital. I called Ethan 3 times in a row. He answered on the 4th call. His voice was irritated. He said he was attending an important dinner party with major clients. Then he coldly told me if I was not dying yet, I could call an ambulance myself. He said I should stop interrupting the work that made him real money. Then the line went dead. That night I dragged myself into the freezing street alone, fighting tears as I searched for a taxi. That was the night reality finally woke me up. My eyes lowered to the old loan documents spread across the table. Ethan loved telling people he bought that luxury house with his own brilliance. He wanted everyone to believe he was some self-made tech genius. But the truth was very different. Back then his credit score was terrible. No bank wanted to hand a massive loan to a young startup dreamer with no stability. So I stepped in. I signed the papers as the co-borrower. I used my own old house as collateral. For the past 5 years, Ethan had been sending mortgage payments through a joint account under both our names. He always believed it was fully his account. Legally, it was not. I was the primary responsible party. That mansion belonged to me. Completely. Ethan and Sarah were nothing more than tenants living under my protection. My fist tightened. I had reached my limit. The final drop had fallen. I could not continue pretending to be the pathetic old father they could step on whenever they pleased. A bold plan slowly began forming inside my mind. I glanced at the clock. 3 in the morning. I picked up my phone and typed a message to my oldest friend, a veteran real estate attorney. At that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do to reclaim the dignity I had lost. And once the sun rose, the real game would begin. A silent reversal, a devastating move Ethan and Sarah would never see coming. At dawn, I arrived at Arthur's office. Arthur had been my best friend since high school. Over the years, he had become one of the most respected real estate attorneys in Michigan. He lowered his reading glasses and carefully examined the thick brown folder I placed on his desk. 10 long minutes passed in complete silence. Finally, Arthur looked up at me. The shock in his eyes said everything. He explained that legally, the 4-bedroom mansion in that wealthy Michigan neighborhood still belonged to me. Ethan's name had only been attached as a secondary borrower on the original loan agreement. Even more important, the monthly mortgage payments had always come from a joint account under both our names. That meant I held complete legal authority over the property. I could make any decision regarding the house without Ethan's permission. Arthur stared at me carefully and asked if I truly wanted to go through with this. He warned me there would be no turning back. I did not hesitate. I looked him straight in the eye and nodded. I finally woke up, I told him quietly. The remaining balance on the mansion was $280,000. That debt was the very thing Ethan and Sarah feared most, while their tech business struggled through a cash flow crisis. What they did not know was that I had a secret savings account, money from the sale of my old mechanic shop property, insurance money accumulated over decades. I had never told them about it. Originally, I planned to leave that money behind for my grandchildren. Not anymore. I instructed Arthur to immediately pay off the entire remaining mortgage balance. Every last dollar of my life savings disappeared in a single transaction. Then the words appeared on the bank system screen. Paid in full. At that moment, a strange feeling of freedom ran through my body. The mansion worth more than $1 million now belonged entirely to me. Completely. I could sell it, rent it, or throw every person living inside it onto the street. I told Arthur to find a buyer immediately. I was willing to sell slightly below market value as long as the deal was cash only and completely confidential. Arthur was a professional. He smiled faintly and said he already had a client from New York looking for property in that exact area. The investor was prepared to pay cash within a week. For the first time in years, I smiled back, but it was not the smile of a broken old man. It was cold, sharp, almost unfamiliar even to myself. While Ethan and Sarah continued attending luxury parties and looking down on the old mechanic they were ashamed of, the legal trap had already begun closing around them. They still believed they owned a beautiful castle. They still believed they had the power to erase me from their lives. What they did not realize was that the mechanic they mocked had just bought back their entire luxury lifestyle with a single signature. By the time I stepped out of Arthur's office, the winter sky had already darkened into evening. The icy wind still cut through the streets. But inside me something burned hotter than fire. Half of the plan was already complete. I climbed back into my truck and drove toward their mansion one last time. Before the storm arrived, I needed to collect the things that still belonged to me. The sale of the house happened faster than I expected. Thanks to Arthur's expertise, the investor from New York agreed to buy the mansion for $1,020,000 in cash. The contract was signed privately inside Arthur's office. Every detail remained completely confidential. The money was wired directly into a brand new personal account under my name. I stared at the 10-digit balance glowing on my phone screen. This was the price of my freedom. 4 days later, I returned to the mansion at 2 a.m. That was usually the hour Ethan and Sarah were passed out after another exhausting night of luxury parties and expensive wine. I unlocked the front door using the spare key I had quietly kept all these years. The house was terrifyingly silent. I stepped softly across the polished hardwood floors and headed toward a small storage room in the basement. That room still contained a few forgotten pieces of my life. I did not take a single thing that belonged to them, only the things that belonged to me. A small wooden box filled with family photographs from the days when Ethan was still a baby. My father's old pocket watch, and my worn mechanic uniforms. The same uniforms that had fed this entire family for decades. I folded everything carefully into a small rolling suitcase. Before leaving, I stopped in the middle of the living room and looked toward the second floor. That was my son's bedroom. For a moment I wondered if Ethan ever remembered those freezing winter nights, when the two of us slept side by side inside a leaking rental house. Probably not. Wealth had erased his memory. My chest tightened painfully. A single hot tear rolled down my cheek, but it was the last tear I would ever shed for that son. From now on, I would live for myself. I quietly pulled the suitcase toward the door and slipped out into the darkness. My Ford F-150 had already been fully serviced and prepared. I drove straight toward Michigan International Airport. I left the truck in long-term parking and handed the spare key over to Arthur. The money from the truck sale would be transferred later. Then I walked into the airport terminal, carrying nothing but a one-way ticket to Florida. A place with warm sunlight, blue oceans, and no betrayal. By the time the plane began boarding, dawn was finally breaking across the horizon. I chose a seat beside the window. As the aircraft lifted into the clouds, I stared down at Michigan slowly disappearing beneath layers of gray winter sky. Then I pulled out my old phone. I removed the SIM card and dropped it into an empty paper cup beside me. Just like that, I vanished completely from their lives. But I did not leave without a final message. On the dining table inside the mansion, I had left behind a plain white envelope, and inside that envelope was something that would turn their peaceful morning into the worst nightmare they had ever experienced. The plane touched down in Florida beneath bright sunlight and warm ocean air. As the cabin doors opened, a soft sea breeze rushed inside. I stepped out of the airport and took a long, deep breath. For the first time in years, my chest no longer felt heavy. I took a taxi straight to the condominium I had rented near the beach. The apartment had a wide balcony overlooking the endless blue ocean. I sat down in a wicker chair, poured myself a cold drink, and turned on a brand new phone with a completely new number. At last I began enjoying the peace I deserved. Meanwhile, back in Michigan, the white envelope on the dining table had almost certainly been opened by now. Inside the envelope there were no insults, no anger, no curses. I had left only two things behind. The first was a detailed financial record I had personally kept over the last 15 years. Every dollar was listed clearly. $80,000 for student loans, $200,000 for the house down payment, $520,000 for tuition, gifts, living expenses, and business support throughout the years. Total amount, $800,000. At the bottom of the page, I had written one final sentence. This is the cost of raising an ungrateful son. I freely gave you this money as your father. Consider my duty completed. The second document was an official legal notice stamped by Arthur's law office and the county property authority. The notice clearly stated that the remaining mortgage balance on the 4-bedroom mansion had been fully paid off and that the property had already been legally sold to a new owner from New York. Every dollar from the sale had been transferred into my account. Ethan and Sarah no longer held any legal rights to the property. I could almost picture Ethan's face when he read it, his skin turning pale, the coffee cup slipping from his hand and shattering across the marble floor. Sarah screaming in panic as her eyes reached the final paragraph of the notice. The eviction deadline. The new owner was a serious investor. They did not care about excuses or family drama. Ethan and Sarah had exactly 30 days to remove every belonging and leave the mansion. Otherwise, law enforcement would remove them by force. I took another slow sip of water while watching seagulls glide across the Florida shoreline. They once told me my absence would be the greatest gift I could give them. Well, now they finally had it. Completely. But the punishment for betrayal had only just begun. The collapse of their perfect upper-class fantasy would happen far faster than they ever imagined. That evening, my new phone suddenly began vibrating non-stop. A message from Arthur appeared on the screen. Attached to it was a photograph taken outside my former mansion. And the image made one thing very clear. A brutal war had just begun. The photo Arthur sent to my phone showed a large moving truck parked directly in front of the mansion. Men in uniform were carrying cardboard boxes out through the front door. The new owner from New York was not wasting any time. They had arrived earlier than expected to inspect the property. The collapse of their sandcastle had officially begun. If you have made it this far into the story, then this story probably touched you in some way. Please help us with one quick thing. Hit subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. Leave a like and comment number 2 so I know you stayed until this part. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan and Sarah's luxurious life completely unraveled. Arthur kept updating me through short emails. Ethan's tech company was collapsing under the pressure of losing the $280,000 I had used to pay off the house mortgage. Without that money, they no longer had any major asset to use as collateral for new loans. Ethan's reputation in the business world began falling apart. People started whispering about the young tech executive whose own father had sold the family mansion and thrown him out onto the street. Meanwhile, Sarah faced humiliation at her elite country club. The same people who once flattered her now avoided her like she carried a contagious disease. To survive financially and continue paying employees, Sarah was luxury handbag collection piece by piece. The Aspen ski vacation for the grandchildren was cancelled immediately. For the first time in their lives, the children watched their parents scream at each other every night over money. The beautiful 4-bedroom mansion that once symbolized their success had become a psychological prison. Every passing day brought them closer to the eviction deadline hanging over their heads. They searched desperately for a cheap rental apartment. From a luxury estate in an upscale neighborhood, they were preparing to move into a cramped apartment in a middle-class district. For people as prideful as Ethan and Sarah, the humiliation was unbearable. The punishment was harsh, but deserved. Meanwhile, I sat peacefully on my balcony in Florida, watching waves crash gently against the shore. I did not feel joy. I did not feel revenge. Only relief. Justice had finally arrived in the fairest way possible. Sometimes I still wonder, was selling the house cruel, or was it simply the lesson they desperately needed? Maybe someone out there can answer that question for me. Just as I was about to turn off my phone and go to sleep, the screen suddenly lit up again. This time it was not Arthur. An unknown number from Michigan kept calling over and over. I finally pressed accept. For a few seconds all I heard was heavy breathing, mixed with alcohol-soaked sobbing. Then came the voice of my son. Broken. Angry. Desperate. The conversation I had known was coming from the very beginning had finally begun. On the other end of the call, Ethan's breathing was heavy and soaked in alcohol. He stayed silent for a few seconds before suddenly exploding into screams. His voice was hoarse with rage. He demanded to know where I was. He demanded to know how I could be so cruel to my only son. He shouted that selling the house had destroyed his career. He said Sarah was crying every day and threatening divorce because she could not survive the humiliation. He accused me of being a heartless father. I did not interrupt him once. I turned on speakerphone and placed the phone quietly on the stone table beside my balcony chair. Then I listened. I listened to every accusation coming from the son I once loved more than my own life. The silence only made Ethan more desperate. After several minutes of screaming into emptiness, his voice finally cracked. Then he began sobbing like a child. He begged me to come back. He said he knew he had been wrong. He begged me to lend him the money from the house sale so he could save his company. He even promised he would throw Sarah out of his life forever, if that was what I wanted. I stared out at the dark ocean beneath the moonlight. Inside me there was nothing left but coldness. I slowly picked up the phone and held it to my ear. My voice was calm, firm, final. I told him I still loved him. But the days of me cleaning up every disaster in his life had ended on that Christmas Eve. I reminded him that he was the one who chose my absence. And now I was finally giving him that gift completely. Ethan screamed that he was my blood. He asked how I could abandon my own son so easily. I answered him with a question instead. I asked if he remembered his son's birthday party when my gift had been left beside the garbage can. I asked if he remembered the night I had a high fever and begged him for help only for him to tell me to call an ambulance because entertaining clients mattered more. I asked if he remembered introducing me to his rich friends as some poor old mechanic from the countryside, an old family acquaintance. Silence. The only sound left on the line was Ethan's broken sobbing. I told him that mansion had been built with my sweat and blood, and when my dignity was destroyed inside those walls, I had every right to take it back. Then I wished him luck with his new life. And I hung up. I blocked the number immediately. That night, I slept better than I had in years. For the first time, I truly believed Ethan had finally received the most expensive lesson of his life. My decision had forced his family onto an entirely different path. But the story did not end there. 3 months later, while walking along a windy Florida beach at sunset, I suddenly noticed a familiar figure standing beneath the palm trees waiting for me. It was the last person I ever expected to see there. The familiar figure standing beneath the palm trees was Ethan. He was no longer wearing expensive cashmere sweaters. Instead, he wore a faded t-shirt and an old pair of worn jeans. His face looked hollow. Dark circles hung beneath exhausted eyes. In only 3 months, he seemed to have aged 10 years since that bitter Christmas night in Michigan. I stopped walking and kept a careful distance between us. I did not look angry. I did not look surprised. I simply looked at him with the calm eyes of a man who had finally let go of the past. The moment Ethan saw me, he slowly walked forward. His legs trembled with every step. Arthur had eventually given him my address after becoming convinced that Ethan's regret was genuine. Ethan stopped in front of me and lowered his head. He told me the mansion in Michigan had officially been taken over by the new owner. His family had moved into a small 2-bedroom rental apartment in a working-class neighborhood. His tech company was gone. Bankrupt, he had sold his luxury car to pay off debts, Now he worked as an ordinary technician for a small company, working 12-hour shifts every day just to afford diapers and groceries for his children. Then his voice broke. He admitted Sarah could not endure the loss of status and comfort. She had packed her things and returned to her parents' house. Alone inside those cramped apartment walls, Ethan finally began understanding the loneliness I once carried. He remembered the years I worked 2 jobs to raise him. He remembered the scars on my hands. And then he cried. Real tears. Heavy tears of regret rolled down his exhausted face. He told me he had not come to Florida to ask for money. He only wanted to say sorry to me face to face. He said he finally understood the value of his father after losing everything himself. I stood there quietly looking at my son. Somewhere deep inside me, something shifted slightly. Not weakness, not anger, just a quiet ripple in a heart that had once been shattered. The lesson had been brutal, but it had finally forced Ethan to grow up. For the first time in his life, he understood work, responsibility, consequences. I slowly nodded and agreed to sit with him on a nearby stone bench so I could hear the rest of what he came to say. This meeting would decide the future of our relationship forever. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket and carefully pulled out a small object. Then he placed it into my hand. The moment I saw it, my heart tightened painfully inside my chest. Because that object carried one final secret. And that secret was about to change everything in the final chapter of this story. The object Ethan placed in my hand was my father's old pocket watch. During the chaos of moving out of the mansion, he had found it hidden beneath a cabinet. Instead of selling it or throwing it away, he had carefully protected it through those painful months. He told me it was the only piece of our family he still felt deserved to be returned to me. He said he was no longer worthy of keeping it. I held the worn metal watch tightly in my hand, and for the first time in a very long time, something inside me softened. I looked down at my son kneeling in the sand beneath the Florida sunset. Slowly I reached down and helped him back to his feet. Then I told him something he never expected to hear. I forgave him, because punishment was never meant to destroy him. It was meant to save what remained of his soul. I needed him to understand that a father's love is not an endless wallet to be drained and disrespected forever. The two of us sat quietly together, watching the sun disappear into the ocean horizon. And there, beside the crashing waves, I established a new boundary between us. I would never return to Michigan. I would never financially rescue him again. His small apartment, his debts, his responsibilities, those belonged to him now. But I told him I would reopen communication so I could speak to my grandchildren again. I would remain their grandfather, even from a distance. Ethan nodded through tears. For the first time in years, his gratitude felt real. Sometimes loving your children means knowing when to let go so they can finally grow up. And never spoil someone so much that they become cruel enough to forget the hands that sacrificed everything for them. To every parent listening to this story, remember one thing. Never forget your own worth. Your sacrifices are priceless, and you deserve respect until your very last breath. Thank you for supporting Dad's Real Life Revenge. Join our community by hitting the like button and subscribing for more raw, emotional family stories filled with hard truths and real consequences. And as always, thank you for being part of this space.